Next. Okay. So I am, wow, that's a lot of I'm Kim Bowie. I'm the deputy managing editor of Reportedly. So first, a little bit about who Reportedly is. We're a very, very small team of 5-6 people, depending, and we tell social news stories from across the world using our community that we've built up. So this is just an example of what we've covered in the past week. So we've covered South Sudan, Venezuela, the murder of an environmental activist in Honduras, and then also the Dallas police shooting. So we're probably most well known for our coverage of Charlie Hebdo and the Paris attacks of last year. But we do a little bit of everyday and sourcing. So almost everything we do is based off of community that we have built up over time as individual journalists and then also as a team. So that's what I'm going to go into a little bit more. To us, community requires 3 things. We have a whole list of our preferred kind of mission statement and values on our website, but these are the 3 that I find most important in dealing with the public. Empathy, transparency, and curiosity. Empathy is something that I think is tough for news journalists to get used to because we're taught to be unbiased. Transparency is very, very necessary now, and then curiosity is kind of what got us into this job, right? I'll talk a little bit more about those, but first, I want to make it clear that community is not something that you can wake up and have. It requires a lot of work beforehand. It requires a commitment. So you can't really, there are news organizations who stick, one person in charge of community, and I think that's a very tough job, especially for a very big organization. It really needs to be a staff-wide commitment, and it needs to be something everybody's involved in because everybody brings different things to the table. And in that vein, so this is my tweet deck as of a couple days ago. We use about I think we're almost approaching 400 public lists, which anybody can use, remix. We're happy to have you do that. We organize them by geography, mostly because that's how we kind of categorize who does what. So you'll see like Zimbabwe we have up, Iran, Minnesota because of the shootings, Texas because of the shootings, and South Sudan because of the violence that's erupted there. These change pretty much daily. There are a few that I keep up, like Syria never seems to go away. Turkey never seems to go away, so we leave those up, but we could add and subtract them. Each of us has a completely different tweet deck. Some of us don't use TweetDeck, but it's all like a column-based thing. I think TweetDeck is kind of the best thing for monitoring and engaging with people because it lets you kind of look at everything at the same time. So when you're creating these lists, and I'm a very large, I didn't used to be a proponent of lists, but as I've been doing this longer, lists have become incredibly important because there is no, somebody can invent this, but there's no technical way right now of collating sources, especially social sources, outside of a list. It's very difficult. There's no like CRM for news sources that exist. So we use a few list managers. Tweez is okay. Tweetbeat works sometimes. I don't think, a lot of these, every time the Twitter API changes, they go down and have to be redeveloped. So that's why I have like 3 or 4 that I switch through. Twitter list copy, and that's a link that you can probably get later, and I'll tweet it out later, is it's pretty much if we find a list that's really great, we'll just copy that whole list over and then cull from there. Tweetbeat is a little bit nicer because it lets you look at somebody's whole list and pull people over. I still use TweetDeck because most of our lists have been pretty populated by now, and then we just add and subtract as we go along. But it's important to look at who follows who. So if you find one really good source, who follows them and who do they follow? I actually find it more important of who they follow because if they're a good source, whoever they're relying upon is probably also a good source. But it's also good to look at the reverse if someone relies upon them. And I look for keywords like journalist or periodista, different things that indicate somebody's really committed to journalism or the telling of truth. Though some people are just not, they're not actually journalists, they're just people who like to tweet about what's happening where they are. And then this is kind of obvious, but user reporting skills. When we have covered things in the past, we have gone very, very deep into social analysis through not just like follower wonk, but we found one profile. We'll look at all the photos that this person has tweeted. It was a high school student, and then who they follow, and then these photos clearly are of this guy that is on their follower list that they seem to tweet back and forth, and then you kind of create a social graph out of that. Like, and sometimes it's literally, we actually make mind maps of people. Like, here's this person, they're connected to this person, they know this person, and this is how we backtrack to know who within their network is worthwhile and who's not. And that's primarily useful for very long-term stories. Something you can do on the fly, but it takes a lot of time. And yes, call the bad eggs. Don't make lists and then leave them just to fester. Sources change, you change, interests change. There will be people who will tweet vehemently if something is happening in their town, but then all of a sudden stop. If there is a shooting or an event or a fire in their city, they will be right there, and they'll be a great source throughout that, but then they all of a sudden will go back to tweeting about hip hop lyrics. Take them off the list. We do that often, and then we add people back in, depending on, and it's also a lot of communication between our team. So you have to really talk about like, hey, just so you know, this person's very reliable about this, but not this. And so we kind of keep notes between ourselves as a team. So like, I can rely on this person for photos, but they're clearly curating videos. Or this person isn't there, but they can probably tell us where they're getting these videos from, or they can introduce us via WhatsApp. So your lists should constantly change. All the time. There's no reason they should stay stagnant. Even kind of our backbone list is our wires list, which consists of, like AFP, AP. Those we actually change in and out as news services go in and out. But the idea of, I know we're talking about creating communities, but I would disagree with the idea of actually creating a community. There is not a community, I think, that we've come across that we had to make. We usually join them and find them. I think it's much more important to do that than to say one day wake up and be like, we're gonna hashtag everything reportedly Iran, and then the people will come and they will tweet with hashtag reportedly Iran. That doesn't happen. No one does that. Any hashtag with your news organization is probably not gonna go viral. Let's just get that out of the way now. So join conversations, don't create them. Find out where people are. And that is not just on Twitter, that is also on WhatsApp, on different messaging networks, Telegram. We use, when people ask us what networks we use all of them, but intermittently. Sometimes we will go very deep into, militias on Instagram, and we'll talk to the militias on Instagram, but they're useless on Facebook. Know where that community is and do your research, and then find them and talk to them there, and then try to join. That's how you get invited to private WhatsApp groups where people are sharing things. That's how you get invited to closed Facebook pages where people are reporting news back and forth as a community. You need to find where they are, not ask them to join whatever your preferred network is. That means you have to be a little bit flexible. So find the door, open it, and prove yourself worthy of the conversation. So don't show up for one story, show up for the while. So what happens we're a very small team, but we tend to pick up, we'll call them beats. So if somebody opens the door to, say, Nauru or Dallas or wherever it is, or certain electric Yerevan in Armenia, that will be the person who kind of tends to be the point person for the community that we create, because they're the person that's talking to them back and forth. And the rest of the team will rely upon them for that. It's best to do that instead of spreading it out, instead of 3 or 4 people, because there might be a time where you accidentally all 3 message them. If we do things in pairs, so we cover like Yemen through multiple people, we'll just make sure that we tell the other person, like, hey, I contacted this guy for this photo. You don't want to be the news organization that contacts someone 4 times. for a photo or something like that. And be invested. These are examples of a source I developed in Nauru. I'm actually on Manus. I met him on Facebook because he wrote a letter to some of the people who were trying to self-immolate in Nauru. And so I just asked, hey, can I message you? And he's like, well, Facebook's not good for me. Can you message me on WhatsApp? And I wrote a story about him and his life on Manus, and after that, this middle one is a document that he sent me and a couple of his other news organizations. That was a very long signed letter to Justin Trudeau asking Canada to take in as many of the refugees as he could. He sent that to us first before he sent it to anybody else because we talked to him, we listened to him, and then this is just me and him talking about rain in prison and how it's the fan is working, and it's important. Even when you're not talking to somebody in person, when we're beat reporters in live, it's like easy for us to like show up at City Hall every week and talk to somebody. The same thing counts on social, like just checking in with somebody like, hey, what's going on? I was in South Africa in May and I'm still talking to those sources about what's going on with them, even though I don't plan on writing a story anytime soon. So lather, rinse, repeat this process. So these are all examples of people that we have talked to in Yemen. I want to point out Hashem Alomeisi, which is one of our favorite sources in Yemen. He is not a journalist. He is, I think he works in IT or something like that. And this is one of our first interactions with him when he was live tweeting a Houthi speech in English. And so we would hat tip him a lot. We would say, he gave us this, or we would ask him for permission to use a photo, and we would regularly talk to him. And then after that, he would always respond to our messages. So this is just me asking what happened with a recent speech. And so he has clued us into other people that we can trust and talk to. And so we've looked at his network. So that's an example of how we've done that, because Yemen is just really hard to get into otherwise. There's a lot of people tweeting, but a lot of people tweeting stuff that is not verifiable, or it's coming from God knows where, and it's good to have somebody to bounce something off of, like, have you seen this? Do you know where this is from? Is this actually, because we've learned that we can't trust a lot of the news organizations in other countries just because sometimes they will tweet things that like are from a completely different conflict or completely different day just to have the photo in the tweet to get the interactions. So don't trust something just because it comes from somebody you trust. You still have to verify it and look through it. So usually this is where someone says, well, I don't have time for that. You do. You have to. This is going to take a long time. It's a slow process. It's something you remain committed to. It's something that will always get you where you want to be in the future. The world is much more open to you now with social media and contacting people. And in that, that's great. It's also kind of dangerous sometimes. So I think it's opened a lot of doors, but it's also caused a lot of problems. So you have to really dedicate yourself to like, what is the right thing to do right now? Who is the right person to talk to? Is this the right time? So a few about those characteristics. First, empathy. And Fergus is going to talk about a little bit more about this. Understand that every request has an impact. Every single time you ask somebody for something, it impacts them somehow. Whether they're safe or not, it's going to change their future interactions with the media. So that's a lot to put on one person, but you really have to understand, like, if you burn this source, you're probably burning it for every journalist that comes after you. So have empathy, like ask if they're safe. Look at their tweets. We're always asking, is now the right time? And remember, on the other side, that we're humans, not robots. And so it's okay for us to say that we're worried about somebody and that we're going to watch over them and that we're hoping for their safety. I don't think that ruins our objectivity by any means to care about our sources. I mean, they're putting their lives on the line in some cases to tell us things. Like, we should probably care about them at least a little bit. These are a couple examples of people that we have talked about. And like, we'll say things are sad or tragic. It's okay to use those words. We'll say we're sorry. Totally okay to do that too. And then I just wanted to show, this is during the Orlando shooting, and this is an example of how this Brandon Wolf, this guy over here, he was at Pulse, and he was tweeting about his friends being shot and can't find them. And then he was later at the hospital. He was not quite bombarded, but almost. He was going through a lot. You could tell he was very emotional. We didn't contact him, but all these other people did. And then he tweeted this, where he just shut down. He's done. He's done with media for the rest of his life. He's not going to talk to any of us. That all those interactions have just been too much for him at the wrong time. And I think that's painful. And I think it's easy to say, I'm behind a computer, I'm just gonna, DM this person, it'll be fine. But every time it matters. Every time it matters. So transparency. Nothing makes people more mad at a news organization than trying to hide that you've messed up. And we mess up a lot. One of my largest messes, I'm very freely, I wrote the wrong Columbia. I had been writing Columbia with a U in the US, and then I tweeted about Columbia the country, and nobody was happy with me. They were very upset. But I had a sense of humor about it. I'm like, I am so sorry. That was a complete fail. I definitely know where Columbia is, and that it is a country, not a state, not a city. And people were really nice about it. We have a little bit of humor sometimes. This is a photo that we accidentally retweeted. Actually, I retweeted, and it's a very old internet fake. It was one of those instances where I was working too fast. And we corrected ourselves. We always correct in all caps. Correction, it's a fake. Photo is from the depths of the internet. And people had a good laugh at that fact that we were pointing out. It's like somewhere from the internet. So it's easy to be, there's nothing wrong with saying you're wrong, and people don't think less of you for that. And then one more example of this is, most recently, Dallas PD tweeted that photo of a person of interest suspect, whatever you want to call them. It took them 17 hours to take it down. It took us a few hours to take it down. But when we did tweet it, we tweeted stuff like this. Like, this is not the first time. Every time we tweet something like that, we give people like 4 warnings. If we're going to describe a video, we're going to describe a video. This is very graphic. A part of our job is news literacy, I think, in teaching people how to consume the news and how we produce things. So you can't just say, this is a person of interest and expect people to know what that really means. They might not really think about it. So I think it's part of our burden to explain that to people. What person of interest? That means that person might not have done it. There is almost never 2 shooters. It's good to remind people of that too. Active shooters are not always, something that actually turns out to anything. It's good to remind people that this might not actually be anything. They're just reports of an active shooter. It might be nothing. It's good to tell people that. It's good to remind them and teach them. Curiosity, ask questions. This is just be a journalist, be concerned, follow up, talk to people. This is how we were ahead on the Paris shootings by, a lot for most news organizations, because I've never talked to Ian Sanders before, but he's been following us for a while, and he just shared something with us. And every time we talk about Paris now, we actually say Ian Sanders is the reason we got this. It was not because I'm a good journalist. This kind man sent us this tweet and told us about it. And then we followed up from there. So if people tweet at you, even if they tweet you crazy things, it's good to respond if it's something that's worth following up on. And telling someone we're going to look into it, not just like they tweeted at us, oh, I'll go look into it. Like acknowledging that they helped. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah. we've got a couple of minutes for questions. Does anyone here in the room want to ask him anything?
What's your policy on deleting something versus offering a correction if it's something like a tweet or something?
We don't delete often because transparency, but we do delete. So we did delete that Dallas tweet of that person of interest. We delete when, like, the kind of rule is if it is detrimental to the story that tweet stays up, detrimental to public knowledge, then we will delete it. And that's always a discussion. It's not a lone person decides this. It's always, hey, do you think we should delete this? We totally got this wrong. We got the wrong photo. We're pointing out a different guy. Should we? And sometimes we say yes, and sometimes we say no. Sometimes we don't delete it. We offer a correction and then just reply to everybody that's retweeted it. It's really a case-by-case thing, but we err on the side of not deleting.
Any others? There's some others from online. Have you found that there's a different networks, different social networks, different platforms for different communities? Like
Yes.
WhatsApp or Weibo or, around the world and different...
Weibo for anywhere, for China, Hong Kong, that kind of thing, for Asia in general, which is really tough because Weibo search really sucks. It's kind of horrible to use, but Weibo is really the best to get a hold of anybody. So I think, like, I have a profile on there mostly used to contact people or search things. WhatsApp and Telegram are very popular in the Middle East. We use that too, and also WhatsApp is huge in Africa. Like all of my sources in Africa don't use, they might have Facebook and stuff like that, but they prefer to communicate over WhatsApp. As much as we can, if we're talking about anything that's gonna maybe endanger somebody's, we try to move it to something that's encrypted. WhatsApp is encrypted, Telegram's encrypted, as safe as we can. We all have PGP for that reason. Just rather be too safe than not safe at all. So there are different places. Venezuela's really good at Twitter. Brazil's also really good at Twitter. Like, it depends on, you kind of have to scope it out and see where people are and what they're talking about. I look at news organizations and where they are posting the most, and that's usually an indicator of what's most popular in that community.
And which network they're posting to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in terms of the encrypted ones, as you mentioned earlier about just being invited to the communities, that's really the only way. No,
yeah. Messaging apps are really difficult. I think they make our jobs very difficult, but you just have to find that one person who's going to trust you enough to be like, okay, I guess I'll let you in my WhatsApp with my cousins. I'm like, I promise I won't annoy them too much. I just have to ask a couple questions, and being very cognizant. That's a really personal space, WhatsApp, and a lot of those kind of group messaging things. So you have to be cautious of what you say there.
And how about Snapchat? Has that been used much and reportedly as well? I know some other places.
Snapchat is fun. I think it's great. I think it's a great way for us to engage with younger users, but there's not really a community of sharing stuff. And usually people will scrape from, if there's something really cool happens on Snapchat, they will probably put it on their whatever other networks, now that Snapchat lets you download and post to other places. So that seems to be the wave.
Anyone else got a question until we switch? No? Cool. All right. Thanks, Kim. That was great. So,